Welcome to another edition of Trunk and Tales as we navigate what is happening in the world of politics. I'm Stacy Smith, and since you're watching or listening to this podcast, I urge that you hit the like or the subscribe button. It is one of those times when politics butts heads with the economy. The stock markets and the people's 401ks took a nosedive after President Trump imposed tariffs. We'll take a look at the long-term and the short-term ramifications. It's coming up in this edition of Trunk and Tales. And with me to talk about this is my panel of political analysts and experts, and they are Keith Schmidt. Keith was the state director for former Republican Senator Rick Santorum. Keith also consulted on Santorum's 2012 presidential campaign, and Keith has his own consulting firm. Also joining us with the Democratic perspective is Eugene DePasquale, the former two-term state auditor general. Now, several of my regular panelists, including former Governor Tom Corbett and my two Democrats on the panel, Joe Mystic and Jim Byrne, could not be with us today. So once again, Gene, thanks so much for joining us and giving us the Democrats' perspective. There's going to be a lot to talk about.
Well, there's always a lot to talk about with Mr. Trump.
Well, speaking of talking, he did talk about it. He said he was going to do it, and then he did it. And the stock markets, at first blush, hated the across-the-board tariffs President Trump just imposed. And while you can say, well, that's just Wall Street, it is where Americans have their life savings. And when the markets go down, so do people's 401ks and their retirement plans. So, Keith, I will ask basically the same question I asked you a couple of weeks ago. Is this a good political move, given most people indicated they voted for President Trump because of the economy and high inflation, and from a political standpoint? Is this something the president can recover from? Because, of course, he will be blamed.
Oh, sure. But things like this that are going to have a certain amount of runway to be able to show the outcome that this administration or this particular president is looking for need to happen as early in the administration as possible. I mean, the countdown is pretty much for every president and for every governor. You know, it's kind of the first 2 years, in this case, the proverbial midterms. So we're staring down, midterms in 19 months? So he has 19 months to play this storyline out. And unfortunately, it's not you punch and an automatic reflex. Something like this, to show the outcome that the president and his chief economists are looking for, is going to take some time, and there's going to be some pain. And if you're going to take political pain, you take it as early in a term as possible. And quite frankly, like I said this president seems to be in a hurry. I said he's in a hurry because he's already going to be 80 next year. He's in his second term, not his first term. And he has the narrowest of majorities in both the House and Senate. So he knows that everything is time-stamped for November of 26. So he needs to show that his idea and his chief economist's idea of how to turn this economy around can work. But it's not going to happen quickly. So the question is, the impact, as you said, on 401ks, probably everyone on this call is affected somewhat by the money we have in the market. The question is, how long is this going to punch us in a way that the American people are going to get very uncomfortable? And he's had to factor that in, though. I mean, this is a political animal. He's surrounded by a lot of people that look at this polling and whatnot. He knows it's an enormous risk, but he apparently believes it's a risk worth taking, that the outcome will be such, similar to, as I said, 40-plus years ago, when some dramatic things happened early in the Reagan administration that nobody thought was the right thing to do, and lo and behold, it turned the economy around, and he was reelected by the largest margin in history. But unfortunately, Trump doesn't have that 4-year. I mean, that was 4 years later for Ronald Reagan. We have less than 2 years. I'm still betting that the president and his people have a plan that will show its residuals in the next 19 months. But it could be a very painful 3 or 4 months to come.
I want to get into more of that in just a second, but Gene, to quote the famous Penguins play-by-play broadcaster Mike Lang, the Democrats must be smiling like a butcher's dog right now.
Well, a couple of things. First of all, I think Keith is right in sort of normal times with a normal Republican president. I'm not sure we're dealing with that right now, and I don't mean that to pick on Keith. I'm picking on someone else with that. And I don't want the current good fortune that the Democrats had in Wisconsin to sugarcoat the long-term work we have to do to regain the trust of middle-class and blue-collar Pennsylvanians. Having said that, here's where my specific criticisms on the president are. He said during the campaign Now, we all know when you say day one, it may mean day two, day three. I'm not trying to pick on day one, but he would start to lower prices on day one. Now here we are, we're in April, and now the tariffs are going on. And Keith is right. Look, there may be a longer play here, but this is going to increase prices for people that already were concerned that prices were too high. If the president had laid out a broader vision, I don't think you'd be seeing quite the up and down of the stock market. But to me, he was going to put them on, then he puts them off, then he puts them on, then he's going to put them off. And I don't think he's laid out that broader vision of, hey, I get it. I get why this is painful. I get why you may be frustrated with this, but we've got to rebuild our manufacturing sector. We've got to reset ourselves on trade. If he had laid out a broader vision, similar to what Reagan did in the beginning of his term, where he said there's too much regulation, taxes are too high, and he laid out an ideological framework for that. I paid as much attention to anyone. I have not seen any of that from Mr. Trump. And the president said in the Oval Office last week, and look, I'm sure if Keith was working for him, I know he would have been banging his head on the wall when they said, Mr. President, this may increase the price of cars by $3,000. And he said, I could care less.
Well, Keith, Gene just brought up kind of what I was going to talk about also, and that is the pessimism of Americans right now. The latest consumer sentiment polls before the tariffs were announced indicated that Americans are not highly optimistic at all. They're becoming more pessimistic. The latest polls also show that Americans say while they like this president right now, they think he is spending too much time on things like tariffs. They want to see prices come down. Your thoughts?
Oh, sure. And it's again, the short-term pain is going to be substantial. And I think that I can broad brush and say there's a plan, or this is what's going to happen over time, or here's the outcome we're looking for. But at this point, I can't even quote the administration or president on those outcomes because they haven't articulated them. So to Gene's point, I think it's going to necessitate in the short term, even though the D-Day is November of 26. You can't wait that long. You have to engage the American people along the way. You have to give them the proverbial hope for a better tomorrow. And everyone, how many times have we heard this in our political lives? It's going to be short-term pain, but the reason we're going through this winter of discontent is because here's the plan for the prosperous spring. And so I have a feeling, because it's hitting the markets and hitting the polling, that there might be an Oval Office address of some sort in the next probably 30 days to say, listen, a lot of people are worried. But let me tell you what my plan is. Let me tell you where we're heading and what I believe will happen over time because of these very aggressive moves for tariffs and the economy. And I think he has to tell that. He has to give his supporters and others talking points of why we're doing this. And I don't think he has done that clearly, to Gene's point. So I would not be surprised if that would happen probably within the next month.
Stacey, real quick, I want to follow up on what Keith said, because I think Keith is spot on. Every president that has leveled with the American people, even if they get a short-term hit to their approval rating, pays a dividend long-term. When we had the massacre in Lebanon when we lost the Marines, and Ronald Reagan said, don't blame anyone else the next day. I'm the president. Put it all on me. When John Kennedy came out and after the Bay of Pigs and said this was my screw up, I mean eventually they earned that respect. And I'm going to pick on a Democrat here. When Barack Obama said you're going to keep your health care plan no matter what, even if you like it, and it turned out certain plans that he took a hit for that, even though it was a short-term gain, it was long-term pain. You were always benefited by coming out and and if the president has a longer-term game plan that would benefit the country long-term, I think you should just come out and lay out what that vision is.
All right, you raised some good points. First, I was going to bring this up, and is this president capable of saying, blame it on me?
Maybe I'll go first. Look, there are things that, obviously I disagree with the president on a lot of issues. There's some things, particularly on the border, I think he's doing a good job, and I commend him on that. I think as human beings, we are all failed. We all screw up every single day. I mean, you go back and think you've been a good parent, but I joke with my kids. I said, there's a million things you would do over again if mom and I could, go over again. The biggest weakness I see in him is he doesn't ever come out and say, you know what, I screwed up. If he's ever said that, I will apologize, but I've never seen it. And I just think that's a weakness. I know he views that as a strength. That's my gut, but I think it's a weakness. I think we all fail every day, if not multiple times a day. I think it's always better to say, I screwed up and I'm going to learn from it.
Yeah, he got some bad advice from his father, apparently, because multiple biographies talk about his father saying never apologize.
Yeah.
So I think he took
Yeah.
that to heart. His father gave him some good things.
Yeah, right. No.
Sure.
I mean, he was born on third base, guys. You know, he tells
Yeah.
everybody he hit a triple, but he was born on third base. All right, but I don't know.
The Pirates could sure use him.
Well, yeah, look, we could use a couple triples for the Buccos these days. Why'd you have to go ruin my Thursday, Stacy?
Yeah.
So I don't think the president. Yeah, you're not going to get him to apologize, but I would like him to outline a plan. I would like him to tell the American people, level with us. The reason that these things are happening in the economy is because we're going. This is where we're heading. Here's the outcome that I'm looking for, and you need to give me X amount of time. It might take for the next 6 months, whatever it is. He's got to tell us what the outcomes are. Because if we have outcomes, if we have something to be hopeful for, that can help us bridge that gap. So we'll see what happens. But
We'll see.
but
We'll see
again,
what happens.
Pardon me?
No, I said we'll see what happens, but I wanted to play off of what Gene also talked about here. You brought up Obama, and you brought up Kennedy, and you brought up Reagan. You did not bring up Carter. That famous speech from the Oval Office did not work well.
No, the what was that? The misery index, and the problem with that, and again from the political term, and this is pure politics here, because I think Carter really, I think sometimes was his own worst enemy politically, even though I think it's probably harder to get a better human being in that office. And I think he did a lot of good things and lived that office with integrity. But to Keith's point, that misery index speech that we're talking about did not lay out an optimistic vision. It was basically doom and gloom, basically things are terrible, and didn't lay out, and if we do these 3 or 4 things, things are going to get better. What Reagan and Kennedy were, and Bill Clinton, I don't know, there's no better master in my lifetime than Bill Clinton had taken the lemons and turned it into lemonade. But he would paint this vision about where it's going to get better. And I think that, point to the Carter speech, and again, God rest his soul, and I think he was a good man, but that speech never laid out an optimistic vision. I think that's what Keith is talking about. Trump's got to say this, basically you want to say bad to horrible right now, however you want to phrase it, but here's where I'm looking to get to. I think that's where Keith's going. You got to paint that it's going to be positive in the long run.
Yeah. Okay.
I saw on CBS this morning, there was a cabinet member on. I'm not even sure which one it was, but they were talking about the tariffs and whatnot. And he said the other thing we're going to look at in the next 30 days is, he said, the tariffs obviously are going to hit any company that sells products from somewhere else in the world. And he gave a couple examples, and I think I caught the one on water. He said, well, these 3 companies are going to suffer. He said, but these 3 companies that are American water companies are going to have a price that's a lot different than the others. He said, and guess what? People are going to buy American, are going to support American companies. He said, and I hope that across the board, we can have examples of that, of if you make it in America, stay in America, use American workers and American technology, we can keep the prices down and fight the trade deficit. If he could find some of those examples and build that into the equation of the education process for the American people, I think the president could be helped on that as well.
All right. I want to stay on the politics side of this just for a second. I think you both know that also, as the president invoked these tariffs, imposed them, the United States Senate passed a resolution that basically said that it's in opposition to the tariffs on Canada. Now, it has no legal ramifications because the House is not going to go along with it. But on the political side of this, is this kind of a danger sign for the president? I'll tie that in also. Then, as Gene talked about already, the Democrats win in the Supreme Court race in Wisconsin. They did hold on to 2 congressional seats in Florida, but the margin of victories there were less than what they were for the 2 people who left those offices. So politically, is this a sign that perhaps the Republican those who are elected Republicans, are having a little issue with the president and perhaps even the base if the margin of victory was smaller in Florida?
Who do you want to go first, Stacy?
Whoever you want.
Oh, yeah. So a couple of things. First of all, Keith's been in those rooms. I've been in those rooms. If you're a Republican senator in even a right-leaning state, let alone a swing state, they are very nervous about their reelection right now, and they want to at least try to give themselves some cover. So I think, I'm trying to not pretend that this is all an angelic move to look. I think some of them, it's about self-survival. I think some of them take like a Rand Paul from Kentucky. I think it's just ideological. I think he is just philosophically opposed to this, and I think, I mean, to me, there's times I scream at him and times I agree with him, but I think to me, someone like Rand Paul, this is pure, like, he just philosophically disagrees with this. The Canadian one, to me, has always been, quite frankly, the dumbest economic and political move. Following NAFTA, and even his renegotiation, I forget what it's called now, with Mexico, Canada, and the United States, the U.S. auto manufacturing sector now is really a North American manufacturing sector. There's parts paid in Mexico, Canada, and the United States. These things are going back and forth. So even if a car is made in the United States, it's still going to be hit by these tariffs, because of Canada and Mexico are all part of this. Because when NAFTA happened, again, whether we agree or disagree with NAFTA and the Trump renegotiation of NAFTA, these manufacturing sectors basically made North America the U.S. It's not now the U.S. car manufacturing industry. It's the North American. So there's no way around that we're going to get hit by this in some areas. But Keith did raise a good point. That is, if the president came out with specific examples, I think that would lessen the blow. But politically, when it comes to some of those U.S. senators joining on this, I think that's their own self-preservation than any high and mighty role on this.
Well, yeah, I would agree that the vote in the Senate. Listen, we're pretty much three political nerds who follow everything. The average American,
Right. Yeah, I agree.
Barely covers or pays attention to the big legislation, let alone perfunctory legislation. So I think that's a day's story and it's gone. But the short-term pain, one of the problems with having such a giant of a figure, and this was faced by President Clinton for 8 years. He was such an enormous 800-pound gorilla that as long as they had him, they were equal to whatever the Republicans had, because he was such a consequential figure. But we gained more state houses, more county commissioners. We took over Congress. All those things happened during his presidency, and up to the last day, they were even with us because they had Clinton. But then when he went away, it was over. Right. I mean, there was a huge vacuum, and some of that is existing right now. We're already going to have some pain because of all the enormous change. And even, listen, you buy a new house and you leave a small house and a big house, you have anxiety. Anxiety is a human nature, and it doesn't escape Americans. We are uneasy because of all the things going on. So there is going to be short-term negative consequences, especially with all the flurry of activity coming out of the Trump administration. And quite frankly, what they see is this enormous, again, figure of the greatest, what do I call him, the reality star in American or the world's history, Donald Trump, and they have to temper it by evening it out. Like, they know that they're for this and they're still hanging in there with him, but when they go to the elections, they almost are saying, hey, I kind of need a check and balance because he's so big that I might have to check and balancing him, and that happens sometimes in those municipal and state elections. So I would suggest, as much as I'm concerned with having our ability to have outcomes that the people can appreciate 19 months from now, I would predict that 2025 across the country are going to be very difficult elections for Republicans at every level.
No,
It's probably true there. I want to continue with this aspect of it as far as the congressional races go, and this is a quote. The day of the election on Tuesday, this was given out before the election, or as it was taking place, by the Cook Political Report. Quote, given the unprecedented and often unpredictable actions we have witnessed from this White House over just the last few weeks, we should assume the issues and personalities that are important in the spring of 2025 are unlikely to be the same topics candidates will be debating in 2026. I think that's what you're both kind of saying, right?
Look,
Exactly.
I think 2 weeks ago, was an eternity. One thing with Trump, and there's things again, you say, oh, this is the biggest thing that's ever happened, and then 2 weeks from now, we're going to have another discussion, and we might even forget some of this stuff. It's just unbelievable, the cyclone. And I think it's intentional. I think it's his personality. He's the human cyclone.
All right,
And
Keith,
I think the
go ahead.
obvious time, Stacy, at the end of April, we're going to reach 100 days. So
Yeah.
my sense now is if I was a political or even an official on his official staff advising him, I'd say, let's get into 100 days and then give a report card and say, here's what's happened. A lot's happened. You're confused out there. Let me explain what we did in these first 100 days, and let me tell you where we're headed. I think that's probably going to happen in early May. You're going to see kind of him give a self-evaluation of the first 100 days of his administration.
All right, well, a subplot to all of this, of course, is after 130 days, Elon Musk and Doge are supposed to finish their work. The election in Wisconsin for the state Supreme Court, a lot of people are now taking a hard look at Elon Musk because he became the front man for that election for the conservatives, and he was basically rejected. I mean, it was about a 10-point win by the Democrat, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I'm trying not to be, pure as the snow on this. It's politics. But here you have someone that is, and look, I'm the former Auditor General. So, look, and we all know there's waste in government, and I want these Inspector Generals to do it. If Elon finds it or if some of his staff finds it, look, and there's something that's waste, get rid of it. I mean, I'm 1,000% with if it's waste. Now, I think it should be, a scalpel, not the axe, but let's move that aside for a second. My issue with him getting involved with the Wisconsin Supreme Court race is he the independent actor for the president trying to root out waste in the government, or is he the political actor that's going to go out and campaign for these Republicans in these offices? And the reason why I bring that up is if I'm supposed to have trust with him as a Democratic member of Congress, Democratic senator, and he says, hey, we're going to do this, and the next day he's out in Supreme Court saying these liberals are all a bunch of bums. And I mean, I'm paraphrasing, but not much. It's hard to build that trust that he's actually looking out for the taxpayer when he's looking at these agencies, as opposed to being someone who's just a hatchet man. And I know the world's richest man, he doesn't need the money. I get that. But still, like, he's in Wisconsin one day attacking liberals, and the next day says, oh, trust me, I'm looking out for the American people when I'm in these agencies.
Well, he did extend himself. He took the chance, decided that was something he should do, and the outcome didn't work. It didn't work in a big way. But more importantly, the fact that it didn't work is the optics, and I agree 100% with Gene. I mean, you can't. The American people that even don't know about politics understand that there's a danger blending the official with the political, and that was, I think, an ill-advised move. And either whether it's because of the outcome or because of the optics, I don't think you're going to see that again anywhere in America.
An interesting part also, which I should add, is that while the state Supreme Court justice was elected as a liberal, as opposed to the conservative who was running against her, who Musk backed, on the flip side of that, voters in Wisconsin did decide to keep the voter ID law in, and they even enhanced it. So maybe it was really a rejection of Trump more than, not Trump, but Musk, than anything else.
This is where, I've got some nuanced points that I think we should be broader in how the ID works, and we should make sure everyone has a free ID, and there's technical parts of that. Remove that for a second. As a Democrat, I've always said we've got to acknowledge that even a lot of our own voters believe in voter ID.
Well, not normally does a state Senate race draw any national attention, but one did in Pennsylvania, the state Senate special election for Ryan Ahmed, who held that seat as a Republican. He gave up the seat because he's joined Senator McCormick's staff. The Democrat in a special election won in, I don't know this area that well, but from my understanding is it should have been a Republican hold on that, and the Democrats flipped it. Am I right?
Yeah, so it is. Keith probably not. Look, I've done moderately well there in some of my races, but it is pretty tough sledding. The Manheim Township suburban part of the district has been strongly trending blue. In Mount Joy and Elizabethtown, in those areas, you've got some smaller colleges there, so there's some blue areas there. But the rural part is heavy Republican, and so it should have been a Republican hold. I'm not surprised it was close. I am surprised the Democrat won. I'm not sure, and I don't mean this with any disrespect, it'll be very tough for him to hold the seat when there is a bigger turnout. but it is, at least in that snapshot in time, a sign of where things stand politically, and that is, it's not good for Republicans right now.
Well, I could tell you that the Republicans are feeling like they might have been asleep at the switch. I mean, it's the first time a Democrat has represented Lancaster County since 1889, and that person lasted a year. I do believe that Gene's correct, but that when there's a larger vote count and more people turn out to the polls on a regular election cycle, the Republicans will take it back. But now it's going to come at a great price.
Right.
They're going to have to spend a lot of money when they want to increase their majority in other parts of the states. All of a sudden, they got to buy back a seat that they shouldn't have lost
In 2026.
So there is some angst there.
Yeah. And sorry to keep.
And our candidate selection might not have been the best. I've heard some criticism on the candidate they put up, but in some ways they put up a candidate thinking we're either going to win by 10 or 20. I mean, if you don't like the candidate, we're still going to win by double digits. There was just such an assumption that you can't turn Lancaster County. So in some ways, in politics, wake-up calls are good if they take the wake-up call. So this actually might be a long-term benefit because they still have a few vote majority there, but I think they're going to look long and hard at the next cycle and not take anything for granted.
Yeah, to Keith's point, sorry, Keith, to interrupt. Sorry about that. But where Keith, I think, is going from the political nerd side of this is that even though it's likely they win the seat back, you still have to spend a lot because he's now a Democratic incumbent. He's going to have district offices, and he's a good guy. Like, he's going to go out and do the meet and greets and have the town halls and the senior fairs. And so that will make him, even though I think it'll be tough for him to hold it, tougher to beat, while there is 3 seats in the eastern part of the state with the governor running for re-election, no U.S. Senate race, and Shapiro will win those 3 seats easily. There is now the concern, they had probably not even had budgeted money for that district. Now they're going to have to spend a lot to beat them while worry about those eastern seats where I think the real battle for the majority will take place.
Interesting. Before we wrap it up, let's talk very quickly, if we can, about the primary in the city of Pittsburgh for the mayor's race. The way I analyze it is that you've got a progressive and you've got a moderate who are running. In the last couple of races in the Allegheny County, which is the county that houses Pittsburgh, you had a progressive continue to hold her seat in the congressional district. You had a progressive who became the county executive. But you had but you had a Democrat who ran as a Republican and won that, who was a moderate for the district attorney's race. So, am I speculating too much that this might be just like you take a look at the race in the Senate race, state Senate race, that this is a microcosm of what may be happening nationwide as far as the Democratic Party goes?
I have, often said, look, and I like Corey and I like Ed, so I'm, consider both of them friends. But in a mayor's race, I do think that if people feel the city is heading in the right direction, the mayor wins. If people don't think the city is heading in the right direction, Corey wins. To me, that's game, set, match. And how people feel about that, look, I think if the election were held today, according to polling, Corey's slight advantage, but the mayor has about a month and a half to close that gap. I don't know if there are broader political ramifications than that. But I will say this, it will be the first test locally post-Harris losing on should the party tack to the center or more to the left.
I think that's where I was going with that, yeah.
And so I think that there's going to be a test on that, but I think the mood of the city electorate as to how the city is doing, I think trumps that, no pun intended, towards the president.
Yeah, even progressives, they might have a much more liberal view even than regular Democrats, but just like regular Democrats and regular Republicans, they care about homelessness, they care about crime, they care about the economy, they care about safety issues and the people leaving downtown and whatnot, and the cleanliness and on and on again. They of course embraced him as a progressive candidate 4 years ago, but they want an outcome.
Right.
And they have not felt that there has been an outcome, and there's been a margin call across the country on the great successes progressives have had in multiple municipal elections and county elections. But then when the report card comes in, some of them are displaced. And unfortunately, Ed is a good guy. I know Ed. I've met him a number of times. He's not a bad guy. He doesn't want to fail. but he doesn't have now the money or the time to turn the opinion around right now. The election is staring him down. He has not had a great success in fundraising, and that sometimes is indicative of the people willing to support his cause. I mean, there's plenty of vendors in the city of Pittsburgh, whether he has a fundraiser or not, should be sending him money if they had a confidence that he would be the next mayor. So a lot of that is, I always say, indicative of the fact that they don't want to be on a list all of a sudden because they think the die might be cast. So I don't know. I have a feeling that train has left the station. I think we're all going to be now questioning just about the margin, but you can't turn things around with the amount of time left, in my opinion.
Yeah, and Keith,
I think people have a certain opinion, and it's closely held, and it's not going to change by May 20th.
Keith is, look, again, on the mechanics of campaign, we've both been in those war rooms, both candidates, operatives, what have you. It's amazing to me that Corey's been on the air for a month and there still isn't a commercial from Ed. I mean, unless you are running, and this is across the country for mayors, even like it sometimes can happen in the U.S. Senate or governor's race when you have someone self-funding. I mean, I've been on both sides of this too. But in the mayor's race, the incumbent always outspends the challenger unless they're running against a self-funder. And the idea that, and the fact that Corey's been on the air for a month and there's no even whiff of the mayor getting on the air yet, I am stunned by that, to be honest. I've never seen that before in local or mayor's races anywhere across the country. And Stacy, to a broader point Keith raised, progressive mayors were winning these elections in 19 and 21 all over the country. And a lot of them have lost their seats since then to much more moderate Democrats. I think San Francisco's one. I think the mayor in Chicago is in huge political trouble. We're looking at a big Cuomo comeback now in New York. So this is not a one-off here. There's something broadly happening where people are concerned about the cities.
All right, good.
Let me make one more point if I could.
Very quickly, yeah.
And that is, sometimes political resumes work for you and sometimes they work against you. And I actually believe that Corey's resume is now working for him. The fact that his father was a former mayor, the fact that he spent over a decade on city council, that he is the county controller. There is a lot of angst in the city because of the last term of Peduto and this term that just really hasn't worked out. They need somebody that's going to hit the ground running on day one. So there is a sense that Corey can make it happen and make it happen quickly. So his political resume is actually, you don't want to be an outsider. Right. They actually want an insider now because there's work to be done and it needs to be done in a judicious manner.
All right. Eugene DePasquale, Keith Schmidt, thank you so much for joining us once again for Trunk and Tales.
Thanks, Stacy.
Thanks, Stacy. See you, Keith.